Okay, we are streaming live on the town's YouTube channel now, so I will go ahead and open this April meeting of the Task Force on Reimagining Public Safety. This is another remote regular meeting. We're continuing with our remote meetings for the time being and all town meetings and all of our public meetings. And we will begin this meeting with the roll call.
Good evening, everyone. I will begin to say that Judith Alvarado let us know she was not going to be here today. Continuing, Keith Cook.
Here.
Sujata Bijou.
Here.
Shannon Blue. Patricia Harrison.
Here.
Chloe Johnson.
I'm here.
Rod Jones. Jason Knapp.
Here, Rod Jones here.
Here.
Tracy Little. Hathaway Pendergrass.
Here.
Hooper Schultz.
Here.
Mark Xavier. Allison Zirkle.
Here.
And we also have Mayor Jen Weaver and Chief Dwayne Hampton.
Well, welcome everybody. It is good to see your names and faces again. And thank you, Eli, for the roll call. And Eli, do we have any audience comments?
No, we don't.
Well then, I'm going to skip over item number 3 because I've already done the welcome. I won't belabor that point. And we'll move on to item number 4, items for decision, our minutes from our March 11th meeting.
I'll go ahead and call the roll for approval of the March 11th meeting minutes.
Eli, I think we'll need a motion first.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's sometimes this meeting feels a little less formal than than kind of town board meetings, but I think we've got to go through the process. So it's a hybrid.
Yes. I heard a so moved.
I think that was Hathaway.
I'll second the motion.
We've got a motion and a second, and now we can roll call.
Thank you. The Keith Cook. Mr. Cook, the call is to you to approve the minutes from March 11th.
I approve.
Sujata Bijou.
Approve.
Patricia Harrison.
Approve.
Chloe Johnson.
Approve.
Rod Jones.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Approve.
Jason Knapp.
Approve.
Tracy's not here. Hathaway Pendergrass.
Aye.
Hooper Schultz.
Aye.
Allison Zirkle.
Yes, I approve.
And those are unanimously approved. Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, we have 2 items for discussion tonight. The first one, item A, is to do a bit of a discussion and debrief from our March meeting where we had the presentation from Dr. Bumgardner, and to follow that up with a discussion of the report that Chief Hampton and Eli sent out about the Hillsborough traffic stop. So Dr. Baumgartner's presentation was, he does research on racial disparities in traffic stops and has studied this issue across the state of North Carolina quite extensively. And then Chief Hampton and Eli did a terrific job on their report, also really breaking down what some things look like here locally. So I also want to thank you, Eli, for your summary of Dr. Baumgartner's presentation in the minutes, because that was a ton of information. It's a lot to digest. And I just thought your summary was really helpful. So thank you. And, traffic stops they're just one type of activity that the police engage in, but those are one of the things that provide a lot of contact with folks. So I think it's a valuable tool for us to be taking a look at what some of those differences and disparities are to learn from. To highlight a couple of the things that Eli stated so beautifully in the minutes, there were a couple of the big questions that came up were really looking at the difference between traffic safety stops and investigatory stops, looking at that distinction. What is it that and then looking at, as far as stops that are kind of investigations, are they doing what it is we want them to do? And I think an accompanying question is, what is it that we can mean the police department, we can mean the community, what is it that we want those stops to be doing? And then are we gaining something from those stops? And if so, what is that? So those were some of the big themes, big takeaway themes that I would pinpoint. And then the other question of, well, why we do have these racial disparities. They are consistent across jurisdictions. Why is this happening? And Dr. Baumgartner was pretty clear that, that's an open question. I think that he doesn't necessarily have answers for that. And that's part of what we're trying to get at and figure out. So with that, I would just like to open it up to discussion for all of the rest of you, for your big takeaways, your questions, things it brings up, and I'll stop there and open it up to folks. Jason, go right ahead.
So one of my biggest takeaways from the discussion was the level of privacy that someone actually has when they're driving. I think Dr. Baumgartner described it as driving in your car, being in your car is more like standing on the sidewalk than it is like being in your own home. So I think that the level of privacy, I mean, this is just me personally. I didn't know a lot about that going into that discussion, but I think that could be, contorted to lead to some of those unlawful or unreasonable searches. Just the level of privacy or right to privacy that someone has in their own car. If there's anything that we can do about that within our community, I don't know how much power we have to influence those type of laws. But that was my biggest takeaway, was the level of privacy that someone has in their car.
Thank you, Jason. And I think that ties closely into one of the things that he said several times about that pretty much everyone, I was really struck by this, pretty much everyone is breaking the law when they drive their car. So almost none of us are driving exactly the speed limit at any given time, et cetera, et cetera. So there can be reasons found to pull people over. What else? Allison, yeah.
Yeah, one thing that struck me was that only 10% of searches actually lead to arrest. So that the other 90% are, I guess, stopped for some reason, but then allowed to, continue, or maybe that means they're given a citation. I'm not really sure, but they're not arrested. And then I was just thinking in terms of safety and public safety for people of color who are driving, and when they get pulled over, from what I've learned, the stress and sometimes trauma related to that just really seems to far outweigh the results, I guess, of a traffic stop. So that was just one thing I was thinking about.
Thank you, Allison. And related is the piece about the alienation that can cause, and that when what is desired is to have a relationship of trust, that can, under those stops, can, even if nothing comes of the stop, people feel like they're targeted disproportionately. That can undermine the trust. Sujata and then Rod.
I was wondering if I could share a personal anecdote related to what we were just discussing. So my husband, he he's with the military and has top secret clearance related to that. While he was driving to work, he got pulled over. He's Black, and he was told he was driving over the speed limit, but he was actually on speed control. So he knew exactly how fast he was going and wasn't speeding. Where he got pulled over, it was actually a criminal offense. So he had the possibility of losing his job because of that being pulled over. So he had to, he hired a lawyer and got the charges taken away, but it can have detrimental effects that you wouldn't even think about.
Thank you, Sujata. Rod.
Yes. One of the things that, let me check, make sure I'm not muted here, that that's kind of struck me and really left an impression on me was how he talked about how a person may get pulled over for I guess like an infraction, like maybe I know I got pulled over once and the lights over my license plate were burned out. And as I was being, questioned and counseled on that, he saw that I had some tools in the back seat. Like I had a work belt, there was a pry bar, screwdriver, utility knife, putty knife. I help a friend do construction outside of my full-time work. And questionings went into, well, what are those tools doing back there? Those could be breaking and entering tools. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed this time of evening? And I guess my question was, at what point does being a good cop cross the line into, infringing upon, your questioning going too far into something that wasn't about what you pulled me over about? That's one of the things that kind of struck home for me, and kind of like, I wonder, was he just being a good cop and thought he might have saw something and maybe asked a few questions, or did he go too far into, and where is too far? Where is that line? And, maybe that's something that the chief could, maybe talk about, but that's one of the things I was left with.
Rod, would you mind, and if this is probing too much, you let me know, but would you mind sharing a little bit about just what that felt like for you? Like what it felt like in the moment when those questions were being asked?
Well, I've always tried to be like, when I get pulled over, I want it to be a positive interaction. I always turn my interior light on. I put both hands on top of the steering wheel like this. I always ask before I reach or move. And I'm always trying to keep the officer at ease. I'm always like, I don't want to take this to a level where it didn't necessarily have to go. And I was young at the time, so I guess I really didn't feel like he was asking questions that he probably shouldn't have, or the questions might have been born out of who I was rather than what I was doing, or if I was doing anything, suspicious that may have aroused his curiosity to ask those questions. So at the time, my awareness wasn't quite where it is now. So sad to say, I really didn't feel like he was doing anything inappropriate, or I didn't feel like he wasn't asking questions that wasn't necessary, because I did illuminate the inside of the car. He could see the tools back there. And at that time, I thought it may have been a fair question. And I didn't necessarily feel like I was being targeted or, asked questions that if I were white, he may have not asked. I didn't necessarily feel that at that time. I may have been like in my mid-20s at the time. And
Thank you.
mhm.
Other thoughts or reactions?
I don't think he would have been doing his job if he didn't observe the things that he said. But we wouldn't want him to do that. We want him to might have a keg of dynamite in the back seat. Doesn't ask you any questions about it. I think there's always going to be some questions that we don't want to be asked. Don't want to be act like we. But we wouldn't want them to not be observant. That's the job, to be observant. My job not to be observant. I walk over a squirrel or something. Policeman can't do.
Keith, I just want to tell you, Keith, that the sound on your microphone isn't picking up super great. I don't know if there's a way for you to speak a little closer to the mic, just so you know.
My voice.
There you go. But if I could recap what you were saying in response to Rod's experience, was that you're saying that that in your mind you would want, police officers to be observant and be thorough. Is that what you're saying? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Chloe.
Yeah, I would say that the thing that stuck with me most from Dr. Baumgartner's presentation, and it really builds off what Allison mentioned when she highlighted that only 10% of searches lead to an arrest, was that where Dr. Baumgartner found the most disparities were in those discretionary decisions of the officer after pulling someone over, whether or not to, I believe it was whether or not to search the car, whereas where you saw a larger uptick in the disparity, specifically for Black men, that decision was made much more often. And, his question being, if only 10% of those searches are leading to arrests, like what is the benefit that we're getting out of this type of policing? So yeah, I mean, that just kind of boils down the question we're trying to answer here. When obviously we want officers to be asking questions, as Keith just said, and thinking about potential situations, but there are definitely times when that's unnecessary. And as Jason said, interferes with our rights to privacy, or a perceived right to privacy that, I would hope that people do enjoy. So yeah, this data is so helpful. It leaves us with so many questions and need for a lot more data. I was glad to see at the end of the report from Chief Hampton that there's a plan for continuing to collect data and continue to look at these demographics, because I think examining this from a lot of different angles is really important, because the answers are elusive.
Very true. And I'm also thinking about Jason's comment about, the analogy between being in your car and walking down the street, which we don't stop people arbitrarily walking down the street and ask them a lot of questions about where they're going or what they're doing. Typically, I mean, I'm not saying that never happens, but it's not. We don't. I believe. I would offer that I think we would find that more alarming, you know, if that was happening a lot in a widespread way. So I don't want to take that analogy too far, you know, without good data to back it up. But I think it's okay to think about it as a thought exercise. Other thoughts or reactions to Dr. Baumgartner's presentation? And Chief, I invite you to, I don't want you to feel obligated, but I want to invite you to any big share any big takeaways or things that made you think about as well.
Seems as though if they're going to stop you, they should be on a dime, be able to tell you the reason why you stopped. You have to think about it and write something down on it. You know what it was. Was I wobbling, or was I, my tail lights was out there? He should only have in his mind why he was stopping, not just, well, car going by, I'm going to stop that one.
Certainly.
I don't know how you do that, Chief, but I know there's some kind of formula.
I'm sorry, Keith. I'm still having a lot of trouble hearing you, man. The sound's not coming through well for me.
I know there's a formula for that, because I don't think they just count cars and, you know, they had to have a reason for stopping the car.
If I could again attempt to summarize, and Keith, you tell me if I'm wrong, is what Keith is saying is that that police officers shouldn't be stopping people. They should be able to quickly identify the reason why they're making the stop, whatever that may be, whether it's you know, a traffic violation or a safety violation or whatever the case may be. And so I think he was maybe asking you what the methodology is, I guess, maybe for your officers or how they approach that. Is that a good summary, Keith?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'll chime in, and I'm trying to kind of stay out of the conversation a lot because it's been a lot of me and others talking, and I think it's really important for you guys to talk. So if you want me to answer something directly, I'm happy to. Otherwise, I'm trying not to interfere with the discussion. You know, to Keith's question, I think the simple answer, and this may not be a very satisfying answer, but I think to some extent, we're trying to apply a lot more of a targeted, planned methodology to something that is really largely very, very random. I mean, there are two ways that, you know, two types of traffic stops that are two or three types of ways officers stop traffic. A vast majority of it is opportunity. They're not targeting a car. They're not seeing it. They see a violation, they pull the car over. Those happen all over the place randomly for all kinds of offenses, some moving, some non-moving. Another issue is there is targeted enforcement where, for example, we've got a complaint about a particular violation in a particular location. Again, they're looking at the violations. They not paying attention to the type of car. There are situations where officers may be targeting a location and use a traffic stop as a tool for that. For example, they're monitoring a drug house and they see a vehicle leave a drug house and they're able to observe a violation. I mean, they've still got to have some kind of violation. I'm going to be honest, the statement that Dr. Baumgartner made about everybody driving is always in violation is simply not accurate. It's not the way the world works. We can't pull people over for insanely petty things. If you're going 2 miles an hour under the speed limit, that's not any different than if you're going 2 miles an hour over the speed limit. I mean, there's a check and balance on what we do in the court system. You know, if we pull somebody over for, you know, going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit in a 50 mile an hour zone, you know, if we found they had killed their wife and there was a body in the trunk, they're going to get off because our reason for stop is just not reasonable. The courts are going to say no. So there is parameters within what the officers would do. Most of our officers try to look for clear violations, good violations. You know, I worked traffic for years and years and years in Durham, and you know, contrary to what Ms. Baumgartner said, it was a lot of work sometimes to find good violations, to find violations that were decent. So the short order is there's a lot of ways traffic stops happen. You know, the majority of the traffic stops that are out there happen because we're either focused on a location because of a complaint, or it's simply part of random patrol. And, you know, that random patrol, for example, speeding on Churton Street. We get lots and lots of complaints about speeding on Churton Street. Most places on Churton Street, speed enforcement is very, very impractical. It's just not easy. We don't have distance. There's too much interference for radar. You can't really get behind people and pace them because there's a stoplight every 15 feet. So officers may use other tools there, like finding, you know, they driving through there at night, they see somebody with a headlight out. Well, they pull them over because just the act of pulling somebody over is going to slow other people down. So it's also a tool that way. So I think that was a really long answer of exactly what I didn't want to do tonight, which was talk long, but that's kind of how it happens in multiple ways. And there are times when the traffic stops are used as part of a bigger investigation, but honestly, those aren't very common. It's not something we use as a tool hardly ever. It's just not what we do. Most of ours is location based because of a complaint or problem, or it's just random.
Thank you, Chief. And I think that anytime we have a chance to just insight into how things work, I always think is really helpful. So thank you. Other questions, before we take a little bit closer look at the Hillsborough specific report, I've just for Keith and Patricia, I think and I think everybody else was here last month, but do y'all have any questions that you wanted to ask about that presentation? It's fine if you don't.
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, other questions or comments about the March meeting? Okay, well then let's,
well,
sorry.
Hello?
Oh,
Hello.
hi, Mark.
Hi.
We hear you.
Sorry. So my question is, though, I think there was some data within the presentation that he mentioned that he didn't have, but he compared it to other communities, you know, about the same size, and identified, saying, you know, the data would be similar to what Hillsborough, you see what I'm saying? So I think, to me, having, you know, maybe later on he could have some additional data, but specifically for Hillsborough. But when he said that, you know, it's good. It's statistically, what he said could be correct, right? But the fact that the data was not there, not for everything, but specifically for some things. I don't remember the things on top of my head, but I remember there were some things that he mentioned that he did not have the data for Hillsborough, but it would be similar. You know, it is, the data is similar for this type of community, or in general across the country, if I could recall correctly.
Thank you, Mark. And if you, Mark, or any of the rest of you, I'll just reiterate that he very generously, you know, offered to answer any follow-up questions. So if people think of those things, please don't hesitate to send them, you know, into myself or Eli. I'm sure
Okay.
it would be fine for you to directly get in touch with Dr. Baumgartner yourselves. But I guess I would just ask if you do that if you get information that is useful to this group, that you share it.
I will. In fact, I will. I think I will get in touch with him on that, and
Okay.
I will share it.
Thank you. Yes. Judge Pendergrass.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank y'all for having Mr. Baumgartner, Professor Baumgartner, present. I've seen his presentations multiple times in the past, and they're data that we take in, and he presents to the school of government, and it's what a lot of us are trained on as well. And it is really interesting to see what the public is able to understand or not understand, simply from the fact of what Jason said at the very beginning of not understanding that you have less protections as soon as you get in that vehicle rather than you're at home, because you think it's my car, I have all the doors shut, I have all the windows shut. But that is the Supreme Court of the United States of America has ruled on many cases for decades and decades now that essentially provide that you have less protection as soon as you get in that car, because it's so regulated. And everything is so regulated as to the rules of the road that provide less protection than if you were just sitting at home. So it simply from that fact, that's why I so appreciate that information, that data, just because it's another point for the public to understand, something that we might learn in criminal procedure as a first-year law student, but there's no necessarily other reason that you might know that.
Thank you. Great point. Anything else? Okay, well, let's, I thought we might take a few minutes to discuss the Hillsborough specific report, which again was a lot, a lot of data. So thank you, Eli. Thank you, Chief Hampton, for putting that together. I'm sure that took a lot of time. And I guess I wrote down a handful of takeaways that I had. I don't know if it's necessarily takeaways, but highlights from that report. So one of them was that African Americans are more likely to be searched and arrested. And if I say something that seems like I'm misreading the report, please jump in and let me know. But that African Americans are more likely to be searched and more likely to be arrested in Hillsborough. So there's a disproportionality there, and that the traffic stops, that the searches and arrests and traffic stops that disproportionality mirrors the disproportionate arrests of African Americans in all arrests. Those graphs look very similar. And then another one was that arrests and citations for traffic stops are relatively small in number. Is that a correct takeaway? Okay, they're relatively small in number, but they are comprised, but those, when an arrest or citation is given, it's largely because of regulatory or equipment violations. So that seemed to go, that seemed to reflect what Dr. Baumgartner told us as well. And again, this is true in jurisdictions all across the state. And that another interesting point that's kind of drilling down a little bit more is driving with a revoked license. That citation or violation really needs some exploration. That's also, those are disproportionately given to African Americans. And those licenses can be revoked for, not paying court fees, things like this. And I wanted to take the opportunity here to ask you, Judge Pendergrass, what is this something that you see in your work, that you've seen across your career, or what kind of discussions are had about that issue? Any thoughts on that particular piece?
Yeah, so that's great. And then actually, there's a big law change less than a decade ago around driving while license revoked charges. Because previously, the way the law is written today is if you are if your license is revoked for a DWI conviction, so we call the driving while license revoked for an impaired revocation. That's a class 1 misdemeanor. You can get up to 120 days in jail. The other version, which is what most cases are, is for some type of revocation, whether it's for, many times it's failure to pay court costs or fines, or failure to show up to court in other counties potentially. That's a driving while license revoked for non-impaired revocation. That's a class 3 misdemeanor, the lowest level of misdemeanor, which depending on your record, won't even afford you an attorney because it's not an offense, depending on what your record level is, that you could even face jail time. So when we get those, we're able to utilize many times the Criminal Justice Resource Department in Orange County and Allison's wonderful team, because there is an employee with the Criminal Justice Resource Department named Emma Ferriola Bruckenstein, and a lot of what she does, she is solely assigned a big portion of what she does is to try to clean up people's records, because you might get somebody who goes before me who it is like trying to connect dots from 4 different counties of court costs not paid here, fine not paid here, didn't appear here, so has a failure to appear, and a $200 fine. So having a professional to be able to walk somebody through how to pay those off without further messing up your license or revoking you further. It used to be previously, if you pled guilty to a driving while license revoked for non-impaired revocation, that would also revoke you for another year, even if you didn't know that. That is no longer the case. That was changed with a big push in the legislature a few years ago. So it's not trying to exponentially negatively impact somebody to further suspend them. But if you're not inquisitive of what's going on in that person's life as to, all right, well, you're here, are you dealing with court costs as an issue? How much do you need to pay in X county? We try to walk through with that person to figure out, if I just give you $250 more to pay, are you ever going to be able to pay any of this off? Is the cycle going to continue? So we ask a lot of questions on that. So as a lawyer, I would find cases where I had to sometimes clean up 10 different counties worth of citations that had revoked somebody. As a judge, I can't advocate for somebody, of course, like that, but I can send them to a resource if I am able to determine what's going on with the record, to somebody who's already in our system, which we're, again, very, very fortunate to have the Criminal Justice Resource Department. And we have an employee who specifically works on those cases to clean up people's records. Sometimes what I'll do as well, as I won't even accept a plea, I'll say, why don't you go talk to Ms. Bruckenstein downstairs first? We'll set a new court date and come back. Sometimes folks just want to pay it, and then they go work with her. That is not normal. Not many counties have her. And I say not many counties, I think less than 5 counties have her. It's more than us, honestly. Allison, I don't know if you can provide any more insight as to what Emma does, but she's such a great asset for us.
Yeah, I mean, she's basically like a free lawyer to represent somebody and advocate for court costs to be, reduced or maybe even eliminated if the person is indigent, whereas the person otherwise wouldn't have had any representation.
Thank you both very much. And go ahead, Chief Hampton.
I just had a question for Judge Pendergrass. Is it still a thing where kids who are flunking out of school can have their license revoked? I know that used to be a thing. Does that still happen?
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that in any type of response. Now I've only been on the bench for 8 months, and I've essentially only been a judge during COVID. So things are, even so much so that in my juvenile court, I've only been a judge since Raise the Age has come into effect, which has been wonderful. But no, I have not seen what you're talking about.
And then I have a related question to on the the funds that I believe the town of Chapel Hill and the town of Carborough have established to help their residents pay for court costs. Allison, do either of you or anyone else have knowledge about how those work? And do those just really go to the county to be distributed through? Do they dole those out as towns, or do those go to the criminal justice, resource crew?
I think it's the town of Chapel Hill that manages that, and the Chapel Hill Police Department kind of reviews the applications for those funding requests. And I'm not for sure, but I think the money is from like donations from a faith group. I think. I could be wrong about that. But those are available
we can get
to
more
pay.
info on that. Yeah, I tuned into a see that. I tuned into a Chapel Hill Town Board meeting when they were voting on it, and from what I think they put together a committee exactly for what Allison was talking about, where if the defendant wants to apply for the release out of this bucket of money, then this committee reviews those applications to then determine if that should be utilized to pay those funds.
Thanks, y'all. That's much appreciated. And thank you, Chloe, for putting that link in there, that it does look like that's happening, at least in some localities. So I'm gonna share my screen for a minute and just pull up that report. I'm not gonna go over the whole thing, but I thought I would just show a couple of the graphs. And if people have particular things they want to go to, that's fine. And then I wanna definitely get to the bottom part that someone mentioned in the go around about the APD's plan going forward. So let me share my screen and see if I can actually share the right thing. Okay, I did it. So I just wanted to just have us a chance to kind of briefly touch on some of these charts. I'm really not going to go over them, but I invite any of you to let me know if you want to stop and if you want to ask, questions of, Chief Hampton. I think I'll just go through it that way. So let me start up here. Here's the demographics. And it's really helpful to have these, us compared to our fellow jurisdictions as well. So it's great to have that in there.
And Mayor, if I can, I'll just chime in.
Please. Yeah.
I think it's important for folks to understand that these are not, we're looking at this as trends in traffic stops. This is across all of the systems. This is across the arrest. You're going to see, if you look at Asheville's data, if you look at Wilmington's data, we see the same things across all of these things. If we look at, the school systems and educational problems, we're seeing these same trends repeated in different degrees across a lot of systems. So I think it's important to understand that we're comparing to our local peers, but we see something like this, when you look at the statewide data and everybody, the same kind of disparity seems to exist across all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so here's one of those that really seems to hone in on one of the main points from Professor Baumgartner's presentation, is that you see down here the vehicle equipment and the regulatory, these comprising a larger number for the initial reason of stops. And also, I can't see all of you now. So please just chime in because I can only see four people at a time on my screen while I'm sharing my screen.
May I ask a question while we're going through this?
Yes, go for it, Mark.
Okay. Chief Hanton, I have a question. So based on if you can scroll up a little bit with the vehicle equipment, I was told by someone that the vehicles that are I would say not brand new, right? The vehicle that are not brand new in poor conditions or more prominent or more I don't know if I'm choosing the right word. There are more reasons behind stopping them. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that true? Because it seems to me that what the person was saying is, it seems to me this may be correct. Because if the vehicle, if it's a brand new, based on the data we're looking at it, and that was we're talking about like 6 months to a year when the person mentioned that to me. And it turns out that by looking at this, I'm saying, well, wait a minute, maybe that person was correct. So what I'm trying to say is that, and that also linked to the idea of the person doesn't have enough money to actually take care of the equipment of the legalese behind, all the costs, right? So what I'm trying to say is that, go back to my question again, all those vehicles are prominent to more stopping. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's a good question, Mark. And I got to answer it a couple of different ways. Obviously newer cars have fewer things wrong with them. So if you've just bought a brand new car off the showroom floor, the chances of all the lights working are much higher than the car we've been driving for 10 years. The same thing would apply if your car just went through an inspection. The odds are everything works. The older a car gets, the more likely something may be wrong with it. That's to some extent a little bit of the logic behind the traffic safety stops for things like equipment, because most people don't know. You don't know a headlight's out. Most older cars don't have the warning lights and things. It's important to understand too, though, that the idea that the officer is targeting an older car, for example, headlight violations. If a car is coming at you at 1 o'clock in the morning with one headlight, you can't tell if it's a 2000 or 2021 Mercedes or a 1970 Mustang. All you see is one headlight. So I would say yes, an older car is certainly more likely to have things go wrong. I know, all of my cars are old. My Honda Pilot's a 2008 with 250,000 miles on it, and things go wrong, and that's not a big surprise. Most of the equipment violations, and it obviously varies a little bit, but the vast majority of what we deal with is going to be a lighting issue, whether it's a headlights, tail lights, brake lights, and in some cases the license plate lights, or it's going to be a window tint issue. Those are the two biggest ones we see a lot. Window tint, usually they only really detect it during the day, and the lights almost always exclusively at night. Occasionally you'll be behind somebody in traffic and realize their brake lights aren't working, but that's that's a lot less easy to detect. We have had, at least in this report in 2019, we had a lot more of the vehicle regulatory, the non-moving violations than moving. There's a lot of reasons for that. In some respects, those are easy violations. There's a lot less argument about, was I speeding, was I not speeding? You have a headlight out. It's either out or it's not out. So often officers will see those and stop them because they're easier violations for them. Expired license plate, you get behind them, the tags are out, it's a lot harder to debate that afterward, as opposed to I didn't stop, or I did stop, or I was speeding, or I wasn't speeding. So officers do gravitate towards some of those violations in places where they're just kind of randomly patrolling. They're also easier to detect in random patrol. If you're just driving around, if you're monitoring speeding, you usually have to be kind of focused on what you're doing. a lot of these violations are ones they run into just out and about driving around. So that drives a little bit of it.
Thank you for answering. Thanks.
I'm just going to keep scrolling through here.
And Mayor, if I could just chime in real
Please.
quick, you know,
Yeah.
I really think the time of day aspect of some of this is something that needs to be dug into a lot deeper than it has been. You know, when we look at things like the vehicle equipment violations, we see a lot of disparity, and so many of those, I mean, they happen at night. That's just the nature of most of those violations because they're associated with lights and darkness. And, you know, Eli did a lot of work digging through some of it, and we really saw kind of some differences by time of day. So it really does kind of open a line of question of, you know, is population different at night than it is during the day? You know, how does that work? You know, and that could be a result of a lot of factors, but that could also drive some of this. If we're having more stops at night, you know, I know our officers focus on a lot more trying to make more stops later at night, mainly out of our effort for DWI. That's our big driver, is make the stops, especially, you know, 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, because that's when our drunks are on the road. And we have a large number of drunks per capita, it seems like, on our roads here. So, you know, I don't know if how that affects things, but I think it's an interesting line of inquiry that is probably beyond anything we can do other than kind of this fairly high level analysis that we did.
Thank you, Chief. And that is, I agree that that's going to be hard to get at, at least in our time together. But it's worth thinking about, and you're reminding me of something that I thought of during Dr. Baumgartner's presentation, which is that drunk driving definitely seems to fall in the category of activity you want to prevent, stop, you know. So that's a real safety issue. And there's different ways to get at that. One of them would be if someone is driving erratically, you know, that's the one we kind of think about. But what I hear you saying is that at night, sometimes you're finding those people because of these equipment violations. Is that what you're saying? Or am I inferring too much?
No, a little too much, but virtually none of our DWIs, or very few DWI, what ends up being a DWI arrest starts with an officer going, I think I'm following a drunk who's driving crazy. You know, we see the videos and the patterns. Problem is, Hillsborough is a small town with 1 million intersecting streets. So getting a good driving history behind somebody, you know, an officer may see something that makes them go, but, you know, a lot of times it's the result of some other violation that initiates that contact, because we simply can't get behind them long enough to develop the driving history of, you know, crossing the center line 5 times in 2 miles. Well, in 2 miles, you're almost out of town. So we have a limited amount of time to find them. And that ends up being something that, you know, usually is a challenge. And a lot of them come from other things, whether it's a stop sign or a stoplight they blow, or whether they have the lights out. You know, they don't turn their headlights on when they drive off. That's actually a very common DWI sign, but it's going to go down on a traffic stop report as an equipment violation. There's a lot of nuance to everything that exists behind some of this stuff.
Thank you. I'm going to get one of these that are a little bit easier to read.
And just one thing to highlight on this one, you know, again, our officers focus a whole lot on prevention through conversation and counseling. You know, we try not to be heavy on tickets. We try to write tickets when we need to. And I think you see that in our, we use a lot of warnings, a lot of education, and I think a pretty heavy amount of discretion in what our officers do.
Do you, it's probably in here somewhere, but rather than me scrolling through, do you or Eli happen to know off the top of your head what's the universe of numbers here for 2019? How many traffic stops that is? Was that the 670 or something like that?
2684.
Oh, 2684. Okay.
Traffic stops for 2019. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's just helpful to have that big number when looking at these percentages.
And we don't have this data broken down by race, right? The outcome, whether there's a citation or not.
I believe we do.
Okay.
I'm just scrolling because I don't know what number it is.
And
so these
if
are
I
for
can
all
add
traffic.
one other piece
Yes.
of information, just to the mayor's earlier comments about more citations and stuff for the regulatory things. Just something for folks to keep in mind. Generally speaking, when somebody's written a ticket for like having an expired license plate, it doesn't have the same impact on their driving license and driving record as a speeding or a stop sign violation. So it's not terribly uncommon for officers, if there's multiple violations, to go with something like a regulatory thing, because it's a way of being nice that doesn't often have as big an impact. But it would require a lot of data mining for me to find exactly how often we do that, if I could figure that out at all. But anecdotally, I know that does happen a fair amount.
Thank you. So Chloe, I believe that was your voice. I didn't see, your face wasn't on my screen, but is this the chart you were hoping for? So we've got the outcome broken down by race here. And I just want to say that when I know people are still digesting all of this and asking questions and thinking, but when we get to the point of, coming up with a report or making recommendations, which we're going to talk about at least somewhat on our next agenda item, we're going to have to talk about the stuff in more depth, so I don't want people to think this is the last time we'll have a chance to weigh in, but okay. So here was another interesting chart that I just wanted to take a moment on. For the most common reasons in Hillsborough for traffic stops resulting in citations and arrests. And here's that where it's mostly vehicle regulatory violations or equipment violations for both citations and arrest, with the caveat that Chief Hampton just mentioned that sometimes sometimes the regulatory violation might be a benefit if there were other more serious things that could be charged. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and it's also important to understand that there's not a correlation here, a relationship between the reason for the stop and what the person was charged with. So we're saying, for example, in citation, 45% of the vehicle regulatory violation stops result in a citation, but that's not necessarily that they're all for regulatory. They could be for other things that are found, discovered, okay, what have you. And likewise, 20% of speeding, they could be being charged with other stuff. The regulatory and the speeding, I think, are two of the ones that are more commonly, the speeding is more commonly charged for what they're stopped for. but a lot of the other reasons have a whole lot of variation in the outcome compared to the initial start.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see here that 40% of the arrests, I guess, originated as a vehicle equipment violation. But as you're saying, Chief Hampton, what's happening there is that because an equipment violation wouldn't usually lead to an arrest, it would have to be something else that led to the arrest.
No one ever gets arrested for a vehicle equipment or regulatory violation. That's really not a thing anymore. 20 years ago, we used to arrest people like custodial arrest for driving while license revoked.
Right.
That's not a thing at all anymore.
Oh, not even for revoked license. Okay. So here it is, this data is indicating that maybe some of those vehicle equipment violations are uncovering some criminal behaviors that we do want to detain people for and potentially arrest them. And who knows what the outcomes of the cases were, but that's an interesting data point there.
It's also a function of volume. There's just been more of those stops, so that there's more vehicle equipment than there are speeding stops, and that results in higher numbers.
This is gesturing towards like if a headlight was out and this person then is arrested for a DWI, correct?
Correct. Or you run their history and you find out they have a warrant.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the next charts outlines kind of some of the reasons more commonly that the arrest happens as a result of.
This one you're talking about? No. I think this is the one I was referencing in my just little intro as something that felt worth highlighting, is that that African Americans are, no, this is not what I was talking about. Sorry. Oh no, it was. So traffic stops are in blue, and all arrests are in orange, and they just really mirror each other, which I thought was pretty interesting.
This is the one I'm talking about. So you can see like vehicle equipment stops, 14 of them resulted in warrants, 17 in drugs of some sort, 11 in alcohol, and then, a few little ones.
So this one I think is worth just putting a pin in to think about more deeply as we move forward, because this comes back to the idea of what it is, what is it that we are really wanting from these traffic stops, and the large number of them versus what results in arrest or charges. So it could be that an out headlight helps you find a drunk driver, which is clearly dangerous. And then it could be that an out headlight then leads to another line of questioning or searching that uncovers drug paraphernalia. So that's illegal and against the law, but is it putting anyone in immediate danger? Sometimes it might be, sometimes it might not be. So kind of what is the goal is, I think that's something that Dr. Baumgartner was asking, was suggesting that we ought to be thinking about. Okay, I'm just going to keep scrolling through. Please tell me if you want me to stop somewhere, because otherwise I'm just going to keep moving down here to the going forward part. I'm going to read these out loud. So going forward, HPD will track the following on a quarterly basis for internal review: demographics of traffic stops by enforcement, subsequent searches, traffic stop arrest, the driving with license revoked, not impaired, no operator's license, and possession of marijuana or drug paraphernalia. HPD will examine our policing practices to identify unintended consequences that can be improved, such as our response to higher crime areas, our use of discretion with minor violations, and our focus on moving violations compared to non-moving violations. And HPD will continue to improve quality control related to traffic stop record keeping and to better define areas of traffic stop data that is not being reported consistently. Significant weaknesses in the data have been identified across multiple systems due to lack of definition of terms, training issues, and human error. And HPD will continue training officers on implicit bias and include HPD traffic stop data with the goal of reducing the stigma of the implicit bias that is evident in policing data. If the officers better understand bias and how it manifests, they will have a better chance of improving outcomes. HPD will consider questions such as, how can this type of traffic study be reproduced? What is manageable for lower capacity agencies? What are the first steps towards being able to analyze the data? What resources are needed to improve law enforcement as a result of collecting traffic stop data? I just wanted to read those out loud. I really appreciate those. That sounds like, to me, like great follow-up from that. And then to open the door in the conversation again to other feedback, responses, questions this brings up for folks. And again, remember that I can't see you. At least I can't see all of you. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And then before we move forward, I wanted to ask what members of the group feel are kind of the main points or questions that this body needs to be thinking about when it comes to what we've learned about traffic stops, and possible areas of thinking and discussion for recommendations this group might make.
You're talking specifically about traffic stops, not other issues.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sujata, go right ahead.
I don't really have an answer, I'm sorry, but I wanted to say that I'm a little bit stumped by, I appreciated the bullet point in those recommendations having to do with the implicit bias training. However, I asked that question to Professor, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name. I asked the question specifically to him, and he said that he wasn't able to find any differences between, people who had been trained or not, or like it was just so widespread across all populations of police officers. So I feel kind of futile.
Go ahead, Chloe.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting area because I've been to a lot of implicit bias trainings over the years, and like personally, I felt that they've been helpful for me in my own self-examination of my behaviors and biases. But I've recently read, from Dr. Baumgartner said he wasn't sure how effective they were, and I've read some other researchers who study policing who don't have a lot of faith in them, which is, it's counter to my personal experience, but I'm just one person. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and I still have, I guess I take the view that they're helpful but not sufficient. You know, they're not a solution to a problem, but I think the trainings I've found them helpful. I don't know if other people here have been through implicit bias trainings and have found them effective, or that they actually apply to real life situations. But I have that personal belief. But yeah, but most recently I read Alex Vitale, who is pretty, just does not believe in them does not think they've been very effective, which is a shame because there's a lot of programming that has reached a lot of police departments and so many people are taking these trainings. So if people have heard that, positive research about it, I would be interested to hear that as well.
Other thoughts on this particular area that we have covered, the field of traffic stops?
I just have a thought about the regulatory violations and pulling people over for vehicle equipment violations, and how that's linked to poverty or lack of access to repair the car or get insurance. And several months ago, the housing department had some funding that they were allowing to use towards transportation. And so people were able to request funding to repair their vehicles, which would then allow them to be able to get to and from work and then start earning an income. And it really went a long way to help people. So one thing that just comes to mind is if people are consistently getting pulled over for not being able to fix their car and they need their car to go to work, then where could we try to find some funding to help people repair the vehicle or get insurance or pay their registration fees if they are struggling financially? Especially if they need their car to get to and from work or take their kids to school.
I'll just chime in that I can probably show at least a dozen documented instances that I've got where the officers fixed people's car after they pulled them over and found something wrong. Having that sort of resource for people would be a great thing. I want to be clear that, the vast majority of time when we stop somebody for an equipment violation, it does not result in some sort of bad negative thing when the end result happens. The problems come when other stuff is discovered while initiating the conversation about, hey, did you know your taillights were out? Very few people are charged with that actual equipment violation because we want folks to go get them fixed, because that's exactly the point. We realize people have to get to work. We're not trying to be draconian or heavy. Very few of the people, it's usually not the same person being stopped over and over and over for this. Most people, when you notify them, we give them a written warning in a lot of cases. They'll come back to us 2 days later, show us they got their light fixed. Mike Tolan, one of my canine officers, bless his heart, I can't tell you how many people's cars he's fixed. It seems like every time I turn around, he's under somebody's hood fixing a light or replacing something. And I think that's, that shows that I think at least for us, the mindset is correct.
Thank you. Mark.
Yes. So having said that, and I'm wondering if that can be part. I wouldn't say. Well, before I say what I'm going to say, is it? Does the I'm sure the Hillsborough Police Department has a Facebook page, right? Because sometimes I think they post something in there. Would it be possible to actually post something relating to, because the number is pretty high with the vehicle being, not being repaired. So how can that be communicated to the community, right? Because I think I'm not trying to, for us to actually pamper or babysit people, but what I'm trying to say is that if those stops, right, we know per data, those stops actually generate additional and other questions that may put the other person driver into a situation where they have to pay fine, whatever, right? So a fine or something that they have to deal with the court, right? With the court system. So now, how can we actually send that information out just to, it is an advisory, a note or something to the community saying that, to help them, remind, to fix your vehicle, something to that nature, right? So you see what I'm saying? Because it seems to me that the data is not, the data is the truth right there, saying that that's a major, that may, not among other things, but that part is really major. So how can we help out in the situation that's where, I don't know what the message would be, right? But I don't know, but I think communicating it to, to Hillsborough page, Facebook page, something to that nature might help as a start.
Thank you, Mark. And maybe keep that in mind for when we get to the what do we suggest be done phase. But, I think it's what I sort of getting what you're saying of the, how can we help the public understand, or sort of like the 9 p.m. routine they do. Did you know that these stops happen? Is that what you're saying, Mark?
Yeah, exactly. Well, something, I mean, it just came into my mind, but I'm trying to say, something to that nature, right? Something that the community could, because at the end of the day, right, no matter, the way we can look, it's a safety issue, right? Safety to the driver and safety for, people, the other drivers and people in the community. So how can that be communicated to people? I think that would be, that's good.
So I'll chime in a little bit on this, where you're going, Mark, and say that I think it's always great to educate the public and help them understand, how to take care of each other, how to take care of themselves. I think all of that is really important. And I think that that's something that HBD does a pretty good job at. I think part of what we are charged with as a group is really trying to think about the fact that it's not, it's true. It's not great to drive around it's not the driving around without a headlight that's causing the racial disparity. It's that next step of the search. So, if African Americans are more likely to be searched once that stop happens for the equipment stop or whatever it might be, then what is that about? And what recommendations does this group have? I'm not asking people to answer that right now, but it is part of our charge that we are charged to do is what is it that should be tried differently, or what is it that we need more information about, or someone needs more information about. So I think that that's kind of the next level that that this group needs to be thinking about.
I've been curious this seems almost impossible, but getting information of kind of following the cases through the entire judicial system. So also what happens in court. It's hard to really analyze the number of arrests or searches when we don't know, we didn't know there was the breakdown of drug paraphernalia that was a certain percentage of, or drug possession and paraphernalia was a certain percentage of arrests after the vehicle equipment violation. But, how many of those were for marijuana and what amounts of marijuana versus cocaine or a quote unquote more serious drug. And I think if I'm recalling the chart correctly, after the vehicle equipment stop violations, arrests based on pre-existing warrants was the largest category of arrests. And I wonder how many of those warrants were for outstanding fees or some other kind of almost, obviously it's related to a past criminal activity, but when I worked with criminal defendants in a completely different state and jurisdiction, a lot of outstanding warrants for not paying probation fees or maybe missing some meetings, but more we would call them technical violations. And so it starts, if most of those warrants are those types of warrants, it starts to seem a little less fair that, I have a headlight out and that's how I'm captured. And so that kind of follow-up information I think would be helpful for a really detailed analysis about how efficient the traffic stop system is being for making these arrests.
Sorry, I'm muted. That's a great question, and I think Hathaway might have a response to that.
I didn't actually. I had a question for Chief. I didn't have a response. I'm sorry.
That's totally fine. I'm sorry for that misinterpretation. So then let me make one quick comment, and then you ask your question. So I think one of the comments I want to make to Chloe's question is that I am so appreciative of the data that Chief Hampton and Eli have pulled together for us so far. And also just a reminder that some of that stuff is going to be, and I don't know whether this is one of those things, it's going to be really hard that the effort that goes into getting it might not really even be that illuminative, might not really tell us that much. So I would just want to be careful about, I don't want us to be afraid to think about things and try things if we can't, because sometimes the data is going to be hard to get. So now I'll be quiet and you go ahead, Hathaway.
I just had a question for Chief. I haven't seen these, but Hillsborough PD, does Hillsborough do regulatory checkpoints?
They do.
We have not done them in a long time, or at least very few. We used to do more of them than we do now. Occasionally, if like the highway patrol is doing one or something like that, our officers may check in with them and hang out and help, but it's not a major tool that we use. I have to look to be honest. I can't remember seeing because they're required to do a report. I don't remember seeing one that maybe, I think it would be a handful, if that, in the last year, and I don't even know if it's that many. It's just not a big tool for us. Occasionally, we'll participate in the DWI checkpoints, which are a little bit different than just a standard, like a driver's license checkpoint. But we haven't been doing a lot of those. We've got other tools.
And I kind of just, I figured that just based upon what I saw, because the because DWI checkpoints in general are a tool that is utilized a lot, and there are very specific parameters that law enforcement has to follow that have been tried up to the Supreme Court. Now they've got to follow certain things that then, of course, defense attorneys will bring to a judge to argue if they're not followed. And there's also the regulatory checkpoints that do occur. They don't seem to be happening very often anymore. For the same, exactly what you're saying as well. That's what I've seen. They're just not. It seems like they've been decreasing. A lot of folks who are having these discussions and have the communities that are having these task forces are coming to that realization or talking about that point. So I hadn't seen those at all, and I was just kind of I was affirming what I was seeing from what I was guessing what y'all were not doing, which is right. In terms of what I wasn't seeing in court was what y'all are not doing in terms of you're not doing the regulatory checkpoints. You're just being a part of the DWI checkpoints, which I get that. So that's another. So for anybody who doesn't know what those are, they're just, a regulatory checkpoint is a checkpoint to check on to stop. There's a certain pattern that you would stop cars that has to be produced, and you have to follow it to the exact degree. And that gets a lot more scrutiny in public than what a DWI checkpoint would be, based on the seriousness of a DWI. So that's good. That's what I was figuring completely, Chief, and that's great. Thanks for letting me know that. I hadn't asked you that before, and because I hadn't seen it at all.
Well, just to give you a little bit of data, I just pulled up the report system real quick. It looks like we've got reports on 2 of them in 2020, and I'm guessing maybe we were helping others. It may have initiated one. Looks like 2 or 3 in 2019, a couple in 2018, and then a few more in 2017. So it's really 2018, we stopped this. I mean, not really a purpose other than it honestly just became more of a headache than it was worth for a lot of them. And it's they're personnel intensive. So, if we have 3 people out doing a license checkpoint, there's nobody else working in town. So that's not really a great tool for us.
Because you have to have somebody directing traffic, somebody actually doing the stop, and then somebody else to be on hand at least. Correct.
Well, you can do them with generally 2 or 3 officers couldn't do one. You just have to realize as soon as you get something, you're kind of done. Everybody's going to be tied up. But again, even if 2 or 3 people are doing a license check, we're not covering town like we should be. Even when we help with DWI checkpoints, so we'll send folks to help Durham, and other places will send them to help us. And usually 1 or 2 people in an off-duty capacity is like overtime. We'll go help somebody with a checkpoint, because it's just hard for us to do with on-duty personnel.
Any other comments or things people want to put pins in? Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Great questions, and thanks for all those replies, Chief Hampton. Let's move on now to our second item for discussion, which is just taking a moment to assess what we've done, what we have left to do, and kind of just take our temperature and see where we're going to go from here. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. So can everybody see this okay? Okay. So just to remind us what we've done so far. So our December, this is our 5th meeting. In December was mostly about intros and setting the tone, talking about how we got here, the town's resolution that we passed after the killing of George Floyd, and how that led to this task force being born, and talk how we would just act together as a group. In January, we talked about mental health calls. And then in February, Chief Hampton gave a presentation about what the Hillsborough Police Department does and how they do it, that was based on questions that y'all sent in to him. And then in March, we had our presentation from Dr. Baumgartner. And then today we're doing our debrief and discussion of the Hillsborough report. So back when you all committed to be on this task force, we thought it would take, it seems, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say I ever said 4 meetings, but 4 to 6 meetings. So what you committed to was at least 6 meetings. So that would leave us 2 left. So I want to be very clear that I am a big believer in honoring people's time and commitments. So there's a couple questions that we have to consider. One is, do people feel like they are interested and able in extending this to probably at least 8 meetings, but that would probably need to be assessed based on what we decide we have left to do. And you don't need to answer that now, but I am going to be reaching out to see where people are there, because I do want to respect people, what people think they're getting into. A couple of clear must-dos that are part of the charge of this task force. So if you will remember, the charge of this group is to take a look at policing in Hillsborough and the racial disparities therein, and think through and get information, as we've been doing, and make recommendations to the town board and town manager about things that might be, recommendations for things that could or should be tried or done differently moving forward. So there's that recommendation piece about policing generally. Then the other piece of that was the resolution that the town board passed said that we would form an advisory board. So the town has all kinds of advisory boards: planning, Parks and Rec, Historic District Commission. So that would form an advisory board that is some type of community police review board. And this group was charged with making a recommendation for what that review board ought to look like. So this is a time-limited group. The Community Police Review Board would be could be a standing advisory board, though, depending on what this group's assessment is of what would the appropriate model be. So those two things are to really think through what, if any, recommendations we have based on the information we have so far. And then definitely need to spend a meeting looking at community police review boards and talking about what would be appropriate for us. And kind of a spoiler alert before we get to that is that one of the things that I have learned over the past year in not reading every article, but reading several articles about this, is that a lot of times they don't work the way people think that they would. So I think it's just really important for us to think through what the purpose of that group would be based on what we know. So that's an important topic area. And then, so my other question to you all, I'm going to move this down off the screen a little bit because I'm not quite ready yet, is what other topics do you all feel we need to cover, or information do you feel like we need? And I will say that it is possible that this group might decide that there is information gathering and assessment that should be done by whatever this community board is. That this group might feel like, you know what, we committed to our 6 meetings, and we need to find a way to wrap this up and recommend for work undone. So I want you all to know, I think that is an acceptable path, but still we need to decide what that is, what work is left undone. And before I totally open it up, I'll say that something that Chief Hampton, there were questions. One of the things that Chief Hampton has not covered yet, that there were some early questions about, is the town's use of force policy. And so Chief Hampton had, mentioned that to me as something he thought people might want to hear more about. And I'm going to editorialize a little bit and say, I am happy to dedicate a whole meeting, half a meeting, whatever people want, to the town's use of to the Hillsborough Police Department's use of force policy. I think I can also tell you, and I don't want you to just take my word for it, that I've seen Chief Hampton talk about the use of force policy on multiple occasions, and it is a very progressive. I'm trying to think of the word that I mean. Hillsborough is very heavy on reporting generously, like even the suggestion of use of force, reporting that, and that that kind of elevated use of force does not happen very often. And so it doesn't mean it's not worth knowing. I think we should know about it, but I think a question is, do we want to spend a meeting on that? Or would you like for, Chief Hampton to send you a report that he's pulled together, like he's done with some of these other things? So that's just a question mark, is how we want to find out about the use of force policy and get questions answered, because certainly people should have questions answered. So now I'm going to be quiet and stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you. And let's talk about what else we need to know.
Mayor, were you saying that one of the follow-up meeting or remaining meetings will be dedicated to talking about community police review boards?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Sujata.
My personal feeling is that we should move into starting to talk about some of the recommendations and make some groundway there. And then while having that discussion, see what gaps come up in that discussion to lead us to what other data or information we need.
Okay, I like that suggestion.
I think it would be good if the chief made sure people had a good understanding of use of force. I mean, I worked in law enforcement for 20 years, and annually we went over use of force, and then there were always people violating the use of force policy. Just, I know everybody won't get everything, but just so they will have a good general understanding of what the use of force policy is. So when we go forward with our recommendations, that they would know what everyone, just so everyone would just have a good general understanding. And when we make our recommendations, nothing will be left out. And it wouldn't be because they didn't understand what he was talking about in some of his excerpts.
That's a great point, Patricia. Thank you. Duly noted.
So I think I agree with Sujata. I think now that we have, a lot of this information that we need, it's time, or it's close to time, to start actually delving into making the recommendations that, this group was assembled to make. But I also don't believe in rushing this process. Like, I don't believe in just saying, let's go get something on the table for the sake of having it done. Like, if there's more information, like on use of force, I can't speak for the group as a whole, but for me personally, I mean, I'm more than willing to commit more time to this, because in truth, we really haven't spent a lot of time together. So I think just continuing to hold meetings and just moving forward with that process at a faster pace, but where we're still getting all of the information that is necessary to make those types of recommendations, is kind of where I feel we need to head.
Thank you, Jason. I don't know if you've heard this before, but there's a bit of a saying within Hillsborough town government that's based on our town manager he's a race car driver, is his hobby. And he and Chief Hampton do safe driving for law enforcement. They do classes on it, and kind of have this motto that we've taken in other ways throughout town of slower is faster. If you move too fast, you're gonna, make too many mistakes and, crash in ways that actually make things slower in the end. So your point is very well taken. Thank you. Cooper.
Yeah, I know we've touched on this a number of times in several meetings, but I'm interested in maybe if we could have more information presented to us about what other municipalities, the county, cities near us are doing, so that like if we make a recommendation, we can make a recommendation that might be able to take advantage of some of their resources. Because I know that Hillsborough is only one small town, and I think that it might make sense for us to try to make a recommendation that is, I don't know, somehow scalable, or again, takes advantage of other things that are already being done, if that makes sense.
So just to be sure I understand what you're saying, so do you mean other, so I know Chapel Hill has a similar task force. I know, I'm not sure if Carborough has started theirs yet, but I know Judge Pendergrass is nodding, they have. Okay, so you mean so that we're, sorry, dog action happening, that we're being kind of consistent or can learn from each other?
I don't know if we need to be consistent, but yeah, I would be interested in hearing if they have anything that anybody has put out yet. I don't know.
I can make some inquiries there for sure. What else? Mark, go for it.
Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, I agree with Jason and also with Hooper, in the sense that number one is to me, I also think that we also have to look at, where we are, what we've learned so far. And based on that, we can work together. And I think we have not scratched the surface yet. So I think there is more to be done into that aspect. So I think it's but at the end of the day, we will have to make some recommendation as to how we have to move forward. But I think that this is just the beginning, and we have to keep working at it by also looking at different counties, how they've done their things, to see what were the mistakes and how that can also fit to certain ideas as to what they have done, and how can that fit to Hillsborough, because every county is different, every city is different, right? So you cannot use one model and expect it to work here. It may not work, right? So I think that moving forward, these are the things that we could take into account.
Thank you, Mark.
Can I throw something in?
Please.
I remember a year and a half ago now, and you all know the organization Justice United. Justice United had two meetings that I remember. And both meetings were about vehicles and the Hispanic community. One of them was at church right up from school board there. The other one was at Churchway in Cedar Grove, Reverend Cruz's church. Standing room, because he had a big balcony and everything. And majority of the people there were Hispanic. They were complaining about driving. Wives were complaining that they couldn't get back and forth to pick the kids up at school. And men were complaining about they couldn't get out of the place for work. And what they were complaining about was it was only like 2 ways in and 2 ways out. And that they were getting stopped sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. getting tickets, spending money, women driving without license because they had to go get the kids because the bus didn't go there. So they were somewhere off of New Hope Road. New Hope Road. So it was only one way in and out. So they were complaining that they felt as though that the police were waiting on them. Come back and forth for work, give them a ticket, and then they would lose their jobs, etc. But so there may be a lot of good things going on in the community, but there are some things that still need some work. Still need some work. And there are things that can be worked on that can be fixed. I'm not talking about 15 Hispanic families. I'm talking about 200. And they live off of New Hope Road up there somewhere, past elementary school. That was a big complaint they had, and that's in our community. So that's something we could. I haven't seen him in a while because I've been sick, but I can't remember the guy's name I called off. Anyway, he would be a good person that for us to want to know something about that subject, that area. He would be a good person to call in and talk to him about it.
Are you talking about Devin?
Devin, yeah, that's the name.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead, Chief Hampton.
I was just gonna say, I add a little light to that, Keith, because yeah, Devin Ross was the guy's name. We had a lot of communication with them. They did a lot of good work. It was all around this issue of, essentially Spanish-speaking folks who did not have documentation, couldn't get driver's licenses. We did a lot of work on it on our end, trying to understand their process to see if there's anything we could do to help them. I wrote letters to, state elected officials saying, fix the problem. Never got any response, but I also just want to throw out there, and I just ask this group to keep in mind, that's not Hillsborough. I understand it's part of our community, but that's New Hope Church Road. That's not us. So just understand that, we do a lot of work in Hillsborough to do policing the right way. So I just caution you to be careful, applying what we do to what other people do, because we do a lot of stuff other folks don't do in good ways. We're not perfect. There's always room for improvement, but it is important to understand that that's not the way we police.
I was just putting it out. I like your answer right there. I just want to make sure that the group knew that was going on.
No, thank you. That is really important, and I think it's also just a challenge of thinking about these issues and many, we run into this a lot, and just thinking about all kinds of issues in Hillsborough. And this might be a good segue to what Mark brought up in his group email that he sent out yesterday or the day before, is that just that, things that feel like Hillsborough are our bigger community are so important for us to think about ways to engage as a broader community, but what we only have control over is our own police department and what happens within our, our municipal jurisdiction. And so that's just hard sometimes to think about and talk about, because it all, the New Hope area, kind of NC10 out that way, that often that feels like Hillsborough, but it's out in the county's jurisdiction. But Keith, I think your point is really important. And yeah, is there anything else you wanted to say about that? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's it for this evening.
Okay. Rod.
Yes. Touching on the note of about not being Hillsborough, the story that I shared earlier at the top of the meeting I just want to go on and say that was not Hillsborough either. That was in Carborough, actually. And then touching on the where we are, what we want to do next, as far as do we want to expand to 8 meetings? I think that's a great idea. Me personally, if I had to sit here right now and tell you 3 or 4 recommendations, I couldn't do that. I wouldn't be comfortable doing that with what we have taken in so far. And for me, it's a lot. And I'm still digesting a lot of that, and a lot of stuff I'm still taking in, thinking over. And I think someone else said to make recommendations for the sake of making recommendations is not something I would like for this body to do at this point in time. If we do make some recommendations, I would like for them to be because of something that we found out, or an issue that we saw, or something that we can say, hey, if we do this, maybe we can see a change in these numbers. And me personally, I'm not sure I'm there yet to be able to help put any input into making such recommendations at this time.
You were on mute, but I think you were calling my name. I just wanted to clarify what I said, because I just fear with some of the other comments I might have misunderstood, because I wasn't necessarily saying that I wanted to be done and rushed to recommendations, but I feel like we've gotten so much information, and each meeting is another set of really detailed information. And I feel like it's time for us to kind of collate that, or kind of try to, I just feel like I need some way to discuss it all together in one meeting to kind of wrap my head around it and start moving towards recommendations. And I feel like adding on more pieces of information is just going to make that so much harder. So I was calling it recommendations, but more like, I don't know the right terminology for it, but some way to start wrapping our minds around it before adding more layers of info.
That makes sense. I understand what you're saying. I think that it's that part of the challenge of 4 weeks going between every time we talk is is spending part of each meeting kind of remembering what we did the meeting before. And anyway, I won't belabor that. I just thank you. I understand exactly what you're saying. So I do want to touch a little bit, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure if Mark actually sent this to everybody or just to myself and Eli and Chief Hampton. So I'm going to just share my screen again. So Mark sent this email, and it has all of these really great questions that he has. And the email was framed by saying how, that kind of the economic conditions and other kinds of equity issues are, they have a pretty important relationship to the criminal justice system that we know. And I'm not going to read all these questions, but I think they're really important questions. And that, as I said in my initial response, is that it is really important that this group try and maintain our focus on what our charge is, because there are other entities that I believe are better suited to tackle some of these. And some of these are also happening in other places. And I can get answers to, I think all, or at least most of these questions, just so you have that information. But I do not believe, and I'll just say, I really try to get people's input, and I think it's really important. But this particular body is not going to be able to parse out the job opportunities for people of color in Hillsborough and the county, because they're so intertwined. And I don't know how much else I have to say about that right now. I think I just want to really help us keep our focus. And it could be, I think it's very reasonable when we get to the recommendations. Oh, the other thing I'll say is that Eli very nicely reminded me that there's the county-wide racial equity plan or group that is, they are addressing and assessing a lot of these questions. And so there is a different group that is trying to get at some of this stuff on a more holistic county-wide level. So all the municipalities and the county have staff that are working on that, and Eli is part of that. And I lost my train of thought about the other thing that I was going to say. So I don't want to suggest that these aren't really important questions and that they're not related to how people get caught up in the criminal justice system. But I think we just have to keep our own focus. And oh, I know what I was going to say, is it could be that, this group feels like we want to make a recommendation about, that how important it is to, for the town to, do what we can to make our community more affordable for all kinds of people, or to, increase opportunity. So I think that there's some general recommendations that can be made. But I'll pause. I'll stop there and see how that sits with people. Does that make sense to folks? I'm wary of trying to feel like I'm kind of brushing things to the side, but okay. And now I am seeing that we're getting close to time. So I want, based on our discussion, I'm going to make a proposal and a commitment that over the next couple of days, I'm going to kind of sketch out a plan for the next several meetings, and then send that out to everybody. Eli and I will send that out. And part of what I really want to hear from people, and I know some people have said it now, but I want people to feel like they can say what's really true for them without feeling any group pressure, but is to ask for responses about if people are able to, keep serving past 6 meetings. So that'll be part of the assessment, and we'll kind of take all that into account and come up with a plan. Does that sound okay to people? There big red flags or things people want to add? Okay.
Jen, can I just add one thing? You were right. I was just confirming. Chapel Hill has already started their same group that we've been doing. Carrboro has not put their group together yet. They discussed it previously. I think that's coming up as to the parameters in a future meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Well, then expect to hear from us soon. As always, thank you all so much for your time and your great questions and thoughts. It's much appreciated. Our next meeting date will be on May 13th. And I will see you all then. And we can officially adjourn.
Hey, Jen.
Oh, yes. Patricia, go ahead.
Just gonna let you know, if I'm a little late responding to your email, I have surgery in the morning. So as soon as I'll get to it when I'm up and around.
Absolutely. Take good care of yourself. I hope all that goes smoothly, and take all the time and care you need.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, good luck.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.